people. So it is that when you're just kind of like, okay, next thing and the next thing versus like, oh, okay, that's the tunnel. Oh, there's another easier pathway over here. Let's take that. So it's being able to look up from the day to day and see like, okay, this is where we want to be.
Hello, I'm your host, Aveline Clark, and this is the 6-Star Business Podcast, where we have conversations with amazing, incredible people all about what it takes to be 6-star, going beyond the status quo, doing things differently, and how they bring purpose, love, and impact into their businesses every day. And my guest today is the lovely Lacaba. She's the CEO and co-founder of 2XU. She won the Stevie Award in 2021 for Employer of the Year. She's been working from home since the age of 15. She's published her own book at 18, became a CEO at 20, and then partnered up with her boss to begin 2XU at 23. She's achieved a lot in her young years, but the number of years does not reflect the wisdom or the scale you would think that would come with such a young person. She knows a lot. She's been through a lot. Her personal journey has really shaped who she is, and I love her wisdom. I love her passion. She's extremely purposeful, and she has a goal, a big one. She wants to help 10,000 entrepreneurs grow remotely and 1 million Filipinos to work from home. She's an inspiration, and it was an absolute joy to have her on the podcast. So sit back and enjoy this one with Lacaba. Hello, it's so good to be here on another episode of the 6-Star Podcast. I'm really grateful to have you here today, Leanne. Welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Thanks, Adeline. I'm very happy to just be here.
Thank you for being here. I'm just fascinated about you as a person. I was really interested to read more about you, and when you reached out, it was like, wow, I'm really excited to meet with you. So let's dive in, and I want to ask you just the basics so we can start to get to know you. Whereabouts do you live in the world? Who do you serve, and how do you serve them?
So I am based in Cebu, Philippines, and who I serve are basically service-based entrepreneurs who are stuck within themselves. So the way that we serve them is we hire, manage, and train a full-time executive assistant with our own 2XU business operating system. So we have like our own kind of almost patented. We'll kind of figure out how that goes, but we have a way where we're able to get them to a point where they're from owning a job to owning an actual business.
Wow, that sounds really interesting and exciting, which is what we'll unpack more of. What do you like doing when you're not busy serving people?
I am a huge bookworm. I have multiple bookshelves around my room. I have one behind me. I have 2 others near my bed. And that's kind of my fave thing. Other than that, it's just travel. I made a challenge to myself every single year that I travel once a month. So that's my other guilty pleasure in a way, because I try to run away as much as I can.
And was that hindered somewhat by the last couple of years?
It was, however, I still found a way for some reason, even in 2021, to do it. Even before all this restrictions lifted, I was getting swabbed. I'm like, it's fine as long as I get to the next place that I want to go. So I still found a way. Yeah, good on you. That's dedication, and well done. That's a whole other conversation, right? Just in terms of that, how I kept my monthly commitment to travel right through COVID. Well done. Mm-hmm. I'm really fascinated to learn about you and the journey you've been on to get to where you are today. Would you like to take us through, what's brought you to where you are today and what that looks like? So it already started when I was 15 years old. At that point, I already fell in love with writing. I was like a journalist at school. At that point here in the Philippines, we haven't changed our school curriculum yet. I was actually going to start college at 15. It was summer. I was bored as heck as a teenager, and I had a blog basically that I was maintaining. I was writing articles,
essays about love, poetry, all of that good stuff. And one of the places where I usually frequented to doing the comment for comment kind of thing for blog posts, one of the people there saw my blog and said, "Hey, I really like the way that you write. Can you go ahead and ghostwrite for me?" And at that point, I've never experienced working online. The plan in my life was, my mom and I's plan were to I go to college, become a lawyer, and then find a job somewhere abroad, because that's usually the path for Filipinos. Is we try to, our biggest export are actual people, not even rice, not everything. It's people, our biggest export. So that was kind of the pathway that I had. So working online was such a mind blown moment for me. It was like, oh, I can get paid while I'm at home to do something I already love. And so when that offer came up, I'm like, I have no idea what ghostwriting is, but I'll figure it out. So that became the start of my just freelance, because no one would ask if I was 18. I was able to use my mom's name to get a PayPal account. So I had all of these going for me. And then I started doing graphic work, video editing, creating banners. When my mom started seeing that I was doing it, she capitalized on it hard, where I was making her office banners, or her the work that she would say in the office, like, "Oh yeah, Leanne can do that. She could figure out how to do it." And I'm like, I will figure out how to do it. And then when I was 18, I went through a very horrific natural disaster here in the Philippines that happened. So we had a Category 5 superstorm. That was actually what it was called, where 255 kilometers per hour winds battered through our city. And sadly, with that, it happened for the first time ever that we can remember, where a storm surge came in. So storm surge is, just keep in mind, like a tsunami basically coming in, but it's slower, but it's still a tsunami. And unfortunately, our house was facing the water. We didn't even know that the water was right there until it happened, because there was usually a house in front of us. After the storm, there was no house in front of us. So the water was actually coming up in our house. I was the only quote unquote responsible person, because I'm the eldest of 4, and then my grandmother, and both my parents weren't there because my dad used to work overseas, again, the usual Filipino path, and my mom was at a work seminar. So it was only us kids. I was 18, my grandmother, and I was just in my head, I was like, I don't want anyone to die on my account. So that was kind of I've got everyone upstairs, and there was this moment where the water was slowly rising in our own home, and then it was up to my neck, and it was starting to tippy toe even, because it was just, the water was just starting to come in. And I had groceries in one hand. I had a big lamp on the other hand, because I knew there wasn't going to be any power, and had the matchbox in my mouth. And as the water started rising, and all of our wood furniture was starting to drift towards me, I had this moment where, people always say your life flashes before your eyes before you die. Mine flashed forward. It flashed forward to what my life would have been if I did go the lawyer route, if I did, do all of the things that my mom and I planned. And I remember, and I still remember, and every time I tell the story, I remember hating it. I remember, like, this is not something I want to do. This is not something that will make me happy. So I said to my 18-year-old self, it was like just 30 seconds, but it felt like forever, of if I survive this, I'm going to change my life path. I'm going to change the thing that I thought that I was going to do. So I spit the matchbook out, screamed for my brother's name. He came running down. He saw, like, oh crap, you're about to drown. And then I handed him everything else that was in my hand. To this day, I have no idea how I got through our big railing at home, but I got to the second floor. And then since then, that's kind of just been the kickstart for any time that I'm going to go through my life. And then I started looking for more jobs online. I started looking for, at that point, I was already getting into my 3rd year of college. I finished the 3rd year. And as we were going to internships, I was like, okay, what if I moved cities? Because this is too traumatic. I was going through severe anxiety, severe PTSD. Anytime that the wind blowed any hard, I would start shaking. So then I wanted to move to the city that I'm in right now, Cebu. And then I moved here alone. I moved here promising my mother I'm going to go back for my 4th year, and living in also a matchbox apartment, which was, I think it's $20 a month, because it was basically a storage room. And that was kind of how I separated myself. And then I started started a job basically as a book editor, which as a bookworm was a dream job of being literally paid to read books. And then worked my way up, became manager. And eventually when my boss at that time said, hey, we're starting a new division, the current manager is going to be moved out. Who wants to be CEO of the publishing company? I raised my hand for some reason. I was 19. And they said, okay, yeah, we'll train you. And then I was like, okay, I'll figure it out. And then a few years later, I had this burning passion of teaching other people to how to work from home, because I could see like a lot of the people that I grew up with going into office. I'm like, it's not a bad thing, but I was like, there's an opportunity. So then I started teaching people how to work online. And then when the topic of like, hey, I want to create my own business came up with my boss, I said, I want to create a virtual assistant agency. Then that's how kind of 2X2 started, as I partnered with my boss. Now he's now my business partner. And that's kind of the passion that drew in. It's just like, I want to teach people how to work from home, whether they're an entrepreneur or a virtual assistant. I want to do both, and which brought me here.
What a great story. Wow. Can you just take me back a little bit, please, to the rising water? After you passed all the things in your hands to your brother and you got off onto the second floor, how far did the water go? Like, and where were your siblings?
All the way to the ceiling of the first floor. Like we could see like once it started receding, we could see like droplets on the floor, in the ceiling. And it was like drenched. We were lucky enough that we had a second floor. Sadly, some of the people there didn't have a second floor. So, for about a week, for the week that we stayed there, we could see sadly dead bodies everywhere. But we had the second floor. It was, and maybe we could hear that it was starting to rise even to the second floor. And we were like, okay, do we have a path to the roof? How are we going to get our 60-year-old grandmother up to the roof? We'll figure it out. But luckily it just only was just the first floor.
Very lucky. How did that experience change the relationship between you and your siblings? Or did it?
It was a bonding moment. Because we, of course, like for me, being the eldest, I'm used to being the peacemaker of like, okay, let's do this, let's do that. So we were playing ukulele back and forth. My grandmother was making us do the rosary because she was a very religious woman. So I think it was that. My sisters at that time were barely teenagers. I think they were like 11 and 12, the youngest. So I was trying to kind of shield them as much as possible from what it actually was, which I was used to doing anyway.
Wow. And how did your mum respond after how was she?
My mom was a more incredible story, for even though that, surviving all of that, because my mom was able to get on the first flight out because of connections, because of her sheer determination, walked from our airport, which is usually like a 30-minute drive, through dead bodies, found friends to then walk with her of like, hey, I'm going home. Yeah, I'm going home. Let's walk together because it's not safe. Through the dark. And then actually at like 9 p.m. as we were going to sleep, I hear my mom screaming my name, and we we're like, Mom, what? How the heck did Mom get here? So my mom was there the next night. She was there taking care of us, like planning things out for us. But that was how my mom was. So she was a survivor through and through, found a way to get back to us.
Wow. Mm-hmm. What an incredible example to you and your siblings too, right?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, these life moments, these are what make us, and these are what give us the ingredients of who we are: our character, our determination, our fears, our anxiety, but also show us the light towards the path. Now, you had this moment at 18 that many people never get. And a lot of people on this podcast have it at some point. And I find that it's one of the reasons why they've figured out that their business and their vocation is not just about money. They've had this moment of clarity and of realization that life is actually far more about meaning and purpose and joy. And that's the moment that you had. You had it at 18, which is really young. And yet, just talking with you, I can see how level-headed you are. And I don't know. Talk to me about that. Like, was it surprising that you had it? Have you met others that had a similar experience or
it was
not?
Interesting. A few months later, or even like years later now, that because I knew people who had the same experience of like swimming through the waters, and some people in our town, because our town was somewhat coastside, it's the Philippines, so it's all islands. It's like we're all near the mountain and near the ocean at the same time. Some of them never experienced it, even though we were literally in the same city. Some of them did, but there wasn't that thing. So that the switch over, and it was honestly a little bit weird realizing it a couple of years ago. Like, oh, I changed my life because I saw this path, and I was lucky enough to know that there was another path that I could go on. And some people were like very happy to just follow the path that they were on. And that doesn't mean that what happened didn't change them. It was just like it changed me very differently. And for me now, anytime in my life, anytime something bad happens, I just think like, oh, not as bad as it was. The storm was called Yolanda. Not as bad as Yolanda. It's fine. I'll survive this too. So it's just taught me that basically.
It's a really great one, right? Because you've got that baseline to compare to at any time. Yeah, that we go through something pretty big. And have you spoken with your siblings about this years later, like how that event impacted them? Obviously, they were younger than you. Has it impacted them in any similar way?
Because it's me and three other siblings. So for my brother, I think for a lot of it for him was it did teach him to drive, because as the only male, it was a little bit of like he was just letting us girls take care of it and all of that. And he started to step up. I can remember that clearly. And for my two other siblings, it just taught them to be prepared. That's the biggest thing, because they saw, like, for me, I knew what the drill when it comes to typhoons. We have it every year. So for me, I had like I said, I had groceries ready. I had things already upstairs before even the storm, not knowing that a storm surge could happen. So that's kind of the biggest thing, is that they just learned how to have things already in stock before things happen. So that's kind of the main things. Like I said, they were really young, and I kind of tried to shield them as much as possible from a lot of it. So it changed them in some ways, and made them more determined than most people.
Yeah. And it's all positive. That's great. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was your mum okay or happy with you changing your life path at
Definitely
that point?
Not. It was 3 years of fighting back and forth of like, you should go back to college, you should have a fail safe, no matter how much you love your job. Or once I started 2XU, you should still try to finish this. So and so it was 3.5 years of fighting back and forth. And finally it was around the time where 2XU started getting accolades. So we started getting awards, or I was doing a lot of speaking gigs, that she was like, okay, I see your point. And this is just all part of my beautiful story. My mom sadly passed away about 2 years ago now. But when she got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, I was the only one there. We were talking at like 5 a.m. and she actually said this word. So I always hold this forever and ever into my heart of like, Leanne, you stood up to me and you won. No one can ever say that about me, because my mom was a very formidable woman. She's like, no one else can say that about me, that they stood up against me and won. So like, I'm proud of you. So that's always going to be in my head forever and ever and ever, that my mom ever did say that.
Wow, what a beautiful thing. And just when you're speaking about her, like I feel like I know your mum. I feel her energy. And
a lot of people say that I've gotten a lot of her traits. So there you go.
Look out. Yeah. I mean, look at what you've created as a result of that moment and your drive, and it's amazing. So tell me what think about where you are today, and then back to that moment at 18. Did you have any inkling at 18, or even a couple of years after that, like that you wanted to help, or was it simply then do the things that you're doing today, or was it simply a result of the path? The next step, and then suddenly, I want to do this work by helping people, work online, and then helping them to be successful online.
Well, that path. So I've always kind of been like just a mini entrepreneur. Anytime that I can find an opportunity, I grab it, hence the whole life path of freelancing. So that was kind of something that came naturally to me. And then it was kind of following through the path. I was doing a speaking gig, and one of the people there was like, "Oh, this is amazing. You've been actually working from home for almost a decade now." Because at the point I was 23 when I started 2XU. And one of them said, "Hey, how did you start?" And then I was like thinking about it, like, "Oh, that's such an interesting question of how did I start?" And then later that evening, my sister pinged me. They were at that point 17 and 18. They were like, "Hey, Ate, remember when you started working online when you were 15? How did you do it?" And I was like, this is, I think, the universe trying to tell me something to start teaching this. So then I just hopped on a video, and I'm like, okay, this is how you do it. This is how you prepare your resume. People liked the first video that I posted on Facebook, so I just kind of kept going. And then 2XU came so naturally with that, because I was teaching people how to hire virtual assistants, how to manage virtual assistants. And one of our students came up to me during a live speech, and they were like, "I love what you're teaching. Can you just do this for me?" So that's kind of like been how everything else has evolved. As someone just asked me like, "Hey, can you do this?" I'm like, I have no idea how, but I'll figure it out.
And obviously with your tenacity and, that, I guess, the intelligence and the tenacity that you have, you've figured it out, and look what you've created. It's fabulous. Yeah. So
Thank you.
There's obviously other agencies out there that offer, virtual assistants and offshoring, different back office parts of people's businesses. What makes TXU different, or what makes you different from others?
The biggest thing, I answered this question the other day from a potential client. I'm like, what makes TXU different? It is that every single time that a problem came up that we had from a client, like, "Hey, do we have this?" or "What do we do about this?" I recognize it always like, "Oh, there's a missing asset. There's something missing here in understanding, or there's something that we missed when we were going through this." Or it's like, "Oh, it's just a different industry. They need something different because they're in this way." So that was kind of how I treated this. Every time something was wrong, we would either create a template out of it, we'd create a standard operating procedure out of it, till we kind of created what we now call the 2XU boss of the 2XU business operating system. So we have a way where we have a systematized way of onboarding the assistant, then training the assistant, and then making sure they're onboarded with their client in the right way. How do we check in with our clients? How do we coach the assistant? How do we give them the full support so they don't feel like they have no idea what they're doing? We're making sure that they armed with the tools and the training that they need. And it's kind of just how it kind of kept evolving afterwards. It's like every time, "Oh, like, do you have a template for creating a goal sheet?" I'm like, "Not yet, but we'll create it right away. Here you go." So that's kind of how it's been evolving. So now we have like a whole, what we call it, a business mind map of things where, as an assistant is learning someone else's business, okay, these are things that you should grab from your client. So then they create their own business mind map, which then becomes an asset for the client moving forward. Anytime they're onboarding someone or they're adding someone to the team.
It's great. I love it. What do you love doing the most in your day-to-day business life?
Honestly, it's creating. I get sucked in. That's my jam, for lack of a better term, is creating things. Like the other day, and it's funny because it's like the plumber with the leaky pipes. So I know I should be delegating this, but I love it so much. I get lost in creating like templates for our people. I get lost in creating scorecards. I get lost in creating, okay, this is now a system that we can now have moving forward. I love the process of figuring things out and then creating an asset out of it. I'm happy that other people have picked up in creating assets as well, but it's still my favorite thing is like whenever someone brings me a problem of like, hey, how do I do this? I'm like, okay, if you don't know how to do this, it means that we weren't able to either train you or create an asset for you to be able to figure this out. Let me figure this out and I'll get back to you. So that's still my favorite thing.
I love that answer because to me, I mean, creation is the pathway forward. That's how we evolve. Like, you know, we evolve organically, but we also have the ability to create the new. And by creating, you're tapping into a different part of your brain. You know, you're obviously, you know, enjoying it. And so you've got that natural sense of joy in what you do every day. And and you're also serving a purpose and an outcome at the same time. Yeah. What's been the most fulfilling thing over the years since you started TXU? What's really given you the most sense of joy and meaning overall?
It's definitely when someone says that I've grown. One is when someone tells me like I've grown so much. That's one of my favorite feelings, is when I'm doing a call with an assistant or just checking in with them, or their manager's the one who tells me that, yep, I've grown a lot since I've gotten here, or I remember who I was when I joined the company, and I've grown so much. Those are my favorite words to hear. So like my magic tingly was like, okay, I'm on the right thing, I'm on the right path. Is getting people to that point. And then even people that I've never met, like on my YouTube channel or even on my TikTok, which is funny, when they say like, oh yeah, I just got a job today, or hey, thanks to your video, I was able to figure this one system I was stuck on. So those are my favorite parts of just that, people seeing like, oh, it is true, it is real that you can work from home and have a career that you love, not just because of a pandemic, but because this is now a lifetime path that I can be on.
Exactly. So are your main customers the assistants, or is it also the end clients that come and hire? Right, the end clients. So what's been some consistent feedback that you've heard from the end clients about their experience with your service? Has there been that? Like if you were to think about the consistent words from a number of different clients?
It's funny because since you guys in Australia just have your usual 2-week break over the holidays, that was my consistent one when I started doing the check-ins for January. Of like, that was the first time I was ever able to take a week off in my business in the last 5 years. And I'm like, okay, cool. Let's keep going. Let's keep freeing getting your assistant to free up. So that's been the most consistent one that I love hearing. It's just like, I haven't taken a week off, or best part is like, I haven't taken 2 weeks off of my business before. I love that I love my assistant just took care of everything else in the operations side, or or they're like, oh, my son was sick and it was the first time I was actually able to take care of them because, someone else was running my business. So that's kind of that's my other favorite part, is other than someone seeing that they've grown, is someone saying like, I can step away from my business. Okay, I'm good.
Is that one of your goals in the work that you do? Like, talk to me about that in terms of there's obviously an offer you make to your clients, but I don't know whether you have tapped into the bigger, more altruistic or forward-thinking goals or futuristic ones, and do you communicate that with your clients? Talk to me about that.
So I don't usually, it used to be in our pitch that will free you up to the point where you have 2 weeks, you can take 2 weeks off. That used to be our pitch, but it sometimes scared people because they don't want to take 2 weeks off of their business. So then we work towards that. So the process that we go through is we find out like which tasks you can give to an assistant. We base it off of the Purdue principle of like, out of the 10 things you're doing right now, 2 things are the only things that you should be really focusing on. Let's delegate the rest and let's start freeing you up. And then we create systems for them. We create documentation, your standard operating procedures, filing systems so you know where things are at. If your assistant gets eaten by a shark, you were confident that things can still be running. And then at the very end, it's then being able to give other people context of your business, because I've seen that a lot happen. I still do it sometimes where I'm the only one who knows where the business is going. So then, okay, let's extract that. What's the vision? What's the mission? What's the org chart that you want to create? So we based a lot of books like Traction or eMyth. As a big bookworm, I've kind of applied everything else that I've studied in the last couple of years into this, again, just asset building machine. So then the entrepreneur doesn't become their own bottleneck.
Which is so common. And in fact, many entrepreneurs don't even realize they are their own bottleneck.
Exactly.
Having done this for a while now, do you have a good sense of the types of clients that you love working with the most?
I did. And it's funny because I'm still at this point the one doing the sales classes, because what drove me into 2XU was as well curiosity of like, how do other businesses work? So now, and it's funny whenever it happens, of whenever a client is just ranting of like, okay, I do this and I do this, and then I've had an assistant before, it didn't work for this and this reasons. So then I create like a really clear, okay, so you need a person doing this and this and this. Your assistant is a kind of person who does X, Y, Z, and they're compassionate, they're caring, they give a crap about your business. And they're like, how did you get that from the rants that I did? I'm like, I've been doing this for a while and I know the kind of person that you are. Or on the flip side, if they're not a match of like, oh, we really just do only work with people who are looking for full-time assistants. Anytime that it's like part-time assistant, it doesn't really work long-term. So then I'm able to quickly filter through just by asking a few questions, if the person could be a fit or not.
Who do you love working with the most?
Honestly, female entrepreneurs. just being able to work with other women who, knowing, of course, for you, like we know the space that we're in, and seeing others thrive and like the way that they do their businesses. So it's mostly women service-based business owners. So like coaches, authors, those who have like a physical service that they serve, but then they're able to do it all online with their assistant. Those are my favorite ones just because they, and this is funny to say, women entrepreneurs are more open to sharing best practices. So like for me, when they say like, oh yeah, I do that this way, I'm like, okay, cool. So then I give back value, back and forth. So, those are my favorite kind of people to work with, is service-based female entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Nice. And, okay. Getting back to the creativity, by the way, I just love creativity as well. I mean, everything we do is creative, and creating, providing a solution to a customer is creating. So, given that you are so driven and forward-thinking and creative, what's the ideal future for you look like?
So I have this all planned out. The next 5 years of my life, I always have some sort of plan the next 5 years. It's basically attaching multiple other service-based businesses to XU. So it could be that now we have an actual boutique for social media marketing. So then the assistant doesn't have to do social media marketing. The client just engages with that. Or it could be like, hey, we now have a bookkeeping company, or we now have a web development company. So it's slowly creating mini companies around 2XU that then supports the assistant, so the client doesn't have to hire someone who might ghost them or might not do a good enough job. It's all inside of the 2XU ecosystem.
That sounds exciting. Is there another model that you've seen that's worked? Is there another company that's doing something similar that
I've seen? Well, I know different agencies who try to do everything at once. And for me, it really shows like, no, it's only just going to be an executive assistant. Will have them learn a lot of the admin work, but they can do some graphic work or some of these work, but they'll primarily eventually your second brain. So we've kind of specialized in that. But for other agencies, they do where, we have a graphic artist on board, or we have this person on board. But for me, I want it to be where it's specialized for each company.
Going deep. I really like that. And I think it's a really wise, smart way to go. Let's talk about Six Star. Obviously, this is a Six Star podcast, and you reached out. What was it that attracted you to the notion of Six Star?
I love that it's named Six Star in the first place. I was like, I've never heard of a company or a podcast for that matter, called Six Star. I'm like, okay, that's beyond what people would usually expect. So that was kind of the thing that drew me to it. Honestly, it was my assistant who gave me a list of like, hey, these are really good, based on my own qualifications for these are really good podcasts to go through. And when I saw yours, I'm like, that's so interesting the way that you guys do things. And again, one of the things I've kind of always shared with people is like entrepreneurship is really lonely. So like seeing other people, hearing other people's stories kind of tightens your resolve. Like, okay, I'm on the right path. Let's do this.
Yeah. Yeah. So what does being Six Star mean to you?
It's basically doing something where it's not even unexpected. It was beyond the something unexpected. So one of the things that I always frame is like, one of the goals that I have for our clients is for them to have a good night's sleep, is to wake up and not have anxiety with the many things that they have to do because their assistant has it. But for me, the Six Star goal is to get to that point where they're taking a 2-week vacation. They're able to fully not look at the computer, not look at their phone. Their assistant just fully has it. So that's kind of how I see it. Is it's beyond just unexpected. It's an expected result. Like it's something that they weren't even thinking for themselves, but they actually even got to that point.
What about for yourself? Because you've answered in terms of your team, which is great. What about for you? What does 6-star mean for you personally?
It's kind of still the same thing of like having something happen where it's more than what I thought. Like it's you know, if traveling, it's stumbling upon a cafe that I just absolutely fell in love with because I didn't even know it was there because it was a hole in a wall cafe. It's things like that. We're finding small tidbits in life where you're able to have something that you weren't thinking that it was even possible or even there. And you found it and you fell in love with it.
Nice. Do you think that comes from, so in terms of that experience, right? And you've had this amazing experience that's unexpected. From the giver's perspective, the giver's side, do you think that comes from heart? Is it because they're doing it because they love it? Do you know what I mean? Like, what's different about the ingredients of delivery of that service that to result in that 6-star experience?
Part of it is trusting the process. That's the biggest part. Just like people try to rush through, like, oh, I want to get to the end of the rainbow. I'm like, no, there's a process that we go through. But at the same time, it's being creative about it. It's finding shortcuts. It's finding like, oh yeah, like if you have your assistant just doing this one thing, they can actually start already bringing money in your business within the first month. So it's seeing those little bits and pieces, and even in life of, okay, how can we get this to the point where we can be creative about this problem that people usually face? So then it's more fun for them to go through. It's smoother. They still have to go through the process, but they see the end of the tunnel instead of them having to figure out how to get there.
Yeah, indeed. How important is it for you to have, I guess, face-to-face connections with customers?
I've only really met one of our clients ever. Most of our clients have always been online. It was even funny because that one client we saw in person, their whole family moved to the Philippines. So that was why we were able to meet them. Nice. But for me, I always love
Zoom connections is fine. Okay. So when I said face to face, I meant both. Yeah.
Got it. For me, I love it because like some people get caught up in their head when it's just through email. So like for some clients, I would be the ones just like, hey, do you want to just talk it through call? Because then I can see like how their face interacts, like, oh, they're droopy here or they're feeling this. I'm like, okay, that would have never come through email. Plus on the other side, like they're able to see that I'm real, that when the review calls with their assistant, that the assistant is real. It's not just something where we're going to pull a fast one over their head, which sadly some of our clients have experienced that, hiring people themselves. Of like, no, this is real. We're here to help to get you growing and get you scaling and having you take that 2 weeks off. So that's kind of the importance for me, is I can catch and see how people are actually feeling versus just reading the sentences off an email.
Definitely. I have a colleague who has an online business and she is it's a successful online business. She does SEO. And she made the comment I think it was last week, that all of a sudden last year she realized that there were more and more people that wanted to connect on Zoom. So she was doing more of these Zoom meetings, whereas it was never part of her business strategy before or the process. People just contacted via the form online, did the transaction, a couple of emails and boom, they'd signed up as a client. And I know that might sound strange, but that's how it was happening for years. And all of a sudden now it's shifted and people want to have these Zoom calls with her. And she found it surprising, yet, she had to adjust her own, I guess, expectations of herself and the process. Yeah.
It's been a shift because people are now used to working from home as much as they can, if they can find the opportunity to be able to do it. But for me, it's super important. Like an assistant could be chatting me one thing, or a client could be chatting me another thing. And then I was like, okay, let's just hop on a call. Let's see how you're actually feeling. And then as I'm asking these questions, their expressions change or their tone changes. I'm like, okay, so this is actually what the problem is. Let's solve it from here.
So it sounds like one of the things that you instill with your assistants is that they are very communicable and they get on and that they have these close relationships with the clients. So it's not just, like you said, email or, an online chat. It's
just get on the call, even if it's a 5-minute call, then you can just resolve it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, that's one of the systems we install right in the first 90 days is we actually ask them, like, even as just minimum 3 times a week, just have a sync call with your client, even just 10 minutes, just so you guys can go through priorities, can go through what needs to get done. So it avoids miscommunication, which does happen when you're working from home a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. It does. How have you seen this? I mean, how has TXU been impacted by COVID, I guess the lockdowns, and then the last 12 months in particular? Like, has it grown since the pandemic?
A lot. So we started TXU. I literally got paid for the first invoice we ever sent October 2019. So literally 4 or 5 months before the lockdowns happened. So that was kind of the funny thing, is that people were then starting to realize, like, oh, I don't have to have my person in person. We can't right now. Let me try to see if I can hire someone online. So it was like basically a crash course for a lot of entrepreneurs of like how to hire online. And for us, that's kind of the pathway for us to keep growing and growing, because then every time we got a new client, they'll say, like, this is amazing. Let me refer my 5 other friends to you. So then we kept kind of just climbing and growing from there.
Yeah, brilliant. So if someone's listening to this who has a business, so it could be a female entrepreneur or male service-based business, and they're going, oh, this sounds interesting. What are the telltale signs or experiences that they would be going through for them to know that this is what they need to do? You know, because often an entrepreneur is so busy, or they're in a bit of denial, or they don't realize that there's a better way, because they've created their own little Band-Aid solutions and process around their busyness. So can you give a picture of that, just to show and explain, you know, hey, here's what you could be going through, and here's also the life that you could be experiencing if you engaged in an assistant from TXU?
So the first sign that someone always needs an assistant is once they have a recurring way to make business. That's the first thing. You can't hire an assistant who wherein you just got your first client, but you have no idea how to get your next client. Because you have to, you know, when you hire them, they're going to be an ongoing expense. They're going to be every single month. You have to pay them whether or not you have a client. So that's the first sign. It's like when you have a recurring way to make money, that's the first thing. Okay, now, you know, at least like 3 months, now I need an assistant. Second is whenever you walk away from your business and something breaks, that means that you need an assistant. Because things are just happening because you're there. Even if you have like employees, if you have a team behind you, if you're still walking away and something breaks, that means that there's something that's not documented, or something that's still in your head that no one has been able to get out. And the third sign is essentially when you are overworking yourself. That's kind of always a good indicator of like, okay, I've worked 80 hours this week. This is probably not the healthiest thing to do. And it's the flip side of that is then you start getting someone who understands you, understands your business. Like, I am forever grateful for my assistant, because she picks things up so well, of like whenever she's rescheduling something or she's going through my email. I rarely look at my emails nowadays. She's the one who tells me, hey, go ahead and check your email. And I'm like, oh, okay, what's my email again? It gets to that point where I'm freed up enough to focus on the creating part, or reading my books, or traveling, because I have this person who helps keep me accountable. If there's something I did want to be able to do, she doesn't spoil me to the point where I don't have to do anything. She makes sure that I'm working on the right things. So that's kind of the magic part of it, is then you get to the point where your assistant's the one giving you tasks and giving you priorities, because you've already set it in either in the past for a goal setting, or you've set it in a meeting that you guys already had, like, okay, these are things I want to make sure gets done. And then they also, or your assistant also, keeps away the distractions. So, for example, right now on my schedule, every 10 a.m., I'm supposed to be writing my book. So anytime that I have a meeting, she double checks it. So I'm like, okay, are you sure you have to be in this meeting? It's like, can we move this meeting to another time so you don't have to do it on 10 o'clock? So then it's having that filter, I guess, of a person who can then just make sure that you're focusing on the right things instead of just dragging yourself through your business.
It sounds like a dream. No, it's wonderful. And what are the kind of results that you've seen your new customers get in, say, the first 3 months?
So in the first 3 months, because we do focus a lot on the task systems and those assets, a lot of it is just I didn't know that this was something that has been on my to-do list forever, and I never thought that I would actually get to it. Those are kind of the usual feedback that I get. Or it could be that I've been trying to figure this one part out, and my assistant just went ahead and actually created the asset for it. So it's usually that where, again, it's the unexpected result of getting this. Like I thought I only wanted a cheeseburger. Turns out I also wanted the fries with it. So it's those unexpected things for them, where they're freed up. They're now starting to get back like, oh, this is what a life is supposed to look like. All because their assistants amazingly being able to take things out of their to-do list.
It's so critical. And I think, for us create entrepreneurs, to have that space and the freedom for creativity, which you've created in your everyday life with your assistant, it's just so important because entrepreneurs ultimately are creators. And what I see in many the people around me often is that anxiety and the stress, and I've experienced it myself, where you're just so caught up in the doing and managing a lot of the admin and being so busy. And it's like, well, my business isn't fun anymore. And I think it's because they're just not having that time for the things that actually bring them meaning and joy. And that's the creating part.
Exactly. So yeah, we the goal for us is to free up enough time to at least have some slither of that. If they haven't seen that in such a long while of being able to create, it's like, okay, now your assistant taking over your email, they've taken over your calendar, they've taken over your social media, they've taken over like these things that have been in your head. They can be even managing your people. So then they get back that time of like, oh yeah, I've always wanted to work on this project, or I always wanted to add this service to my business. It's just creating that space to be able to breathe and think.
Yeah, it's just beautiful. Something that I meant to ask you earlier, and it's sort of sitting here, and it's about your books, because you are such an avid reader. Do you read any genre or any specific, like with genres? What is it that you read the most?
Fiction varies a lot. Like I could be reading a dark fantasy book, or I could be reading, right now I'm reading The Hobbit, actually, because I realized I've never read Lord of the Rings. So it can vary depending on what I kind of need, because if my life is super stressful, then I read just a teeny boppy romance book just to kind of calm my brain. But then when I'm creating, actually when I'm in a good flow, I'm reading a lot of fantasy books. I'm reading a lot of books about like fairies who are in another world. But then when it comes to nonfiction books, it's usually written by female authors. I just realized that's a lot of what the books that I read. A lot of business books as well. Like I mentioned, books like E-Myth or Traction. And it's usually anytime that someone says like, oh, this book changed my life, I'm like, okay, let me read it. That's usually my reaction. And then I grab a physical copy or read it on my Kindle.
That's awesome. And I love how your genre changes depending on what's going on for you as well. Yeah.
Yep.
And is there any particular book that you highly recommend for a particular, I guess, state of being? Like, if you're in flow, or if you want to be inspired, or, if you just want to be creative, what do you recommend?
I always recommend the book E-Myth. I've mentioned it multiple times, and it's mostly because it's the first book that ever taught me how to really free myself up. And in the book, it teaches like, think of your business as a franchise. It's not probably never going to be a franchise, but think of it like, how would you be able to give an entrepreneur who wants your business because they see how amazing it is, and how can you be able to give that to them? I'm like, so smart, because then that started my brain thinking of like, okay, how can I turn my service-based business into a product, which is basically what we made into XU. So that's anytime someone wants to like start with their business, I always recommend that book, because then you start removing yourself from the literal equation that is your business. So then you can create an actual life, not just based on your business.
It's a great book, and I think for me it's been many years since I've read it, so it's probably it's a reminder to go and read it again. Yeah. Okay, coming in for a landing, getting close to the end. What do you think is one of the biggest barriers that people have to being 6-star?
It's when they can't see beyond themselves. I think that's the biggest one. is when they're just looking at the next step and the next step, which sometimes in an entrepreneur journey is all you need to do, is like just look at the next step and the next and the next step. But when you can't see beyond the steps, it's going to be really hard for you to be able to be creative, to think of other ways that you can either give someone a 6-star experience, or to even give yourself a 6-star experience. So then you know the feeling that you want to give to other people. So it is that when you're just kind of like, okay, next thing and the next thing, versus like, oh, okay, that's the tunnel. Oh, there's another easier pathway over here. Let's take that. So it's being able to look up from the day to day and see like, okay, this is where we want to be.
How can they do that? Well, like, is there an easier way to jolt someone out of the being stuck and looking at the day to day? Do you know what I mean? Like, how does one become aware that I've got to do this to actually step out of this?
This is going to sound silly, but for me, the way that I do it is I take myself on a self-date. Like I will take myself out on a meal. I'll bring a book. That's I have 3 qualities of a self-date. Is I'm not supposed to be working. I'm supposed to not even be responding to people. I let people know like, hey, for the next 2 hours, I'm not going to be responding. Second is I bring a book. So I do something that's out of the usual. And 3, it has to be a full meal. It can't just be a coffee. It can't just be a snack. It's a full meal where I'm sitting down, I'm having this time to myself, because then it makes these everyday things seem smaller, because you're just focusing on yourself. You're focusing like, okay, this is how I'm feeling really stressed and frustrated right now. Okay, let's walk ourselves through this. So it opens you up to thinking outside of just looking at your computer, especially for me. Like, I work from home. My bedroom is in where my office is at. So then it's easy to kind of get stuck in like always in the work mode. So it's taking that bit of pause to recharge and think for yourself. That works wonders for me. Every time I do it, I know when I haven't done it in a while, because then I start doing that dredge of like, okay, I'm just looking at the next thing. And then I remember like, oh, I haven't done that in a while. Okay, I should probably just do that. And then my brain frees up and like, okay, I can see the light of the end of the tunnel. Let's see if I can not just do the day to day, but actually get to the point where it is easier for me.
I love that, and it's just giving to yourself instead of giving to the business and other people. And
exactly.
And I think that's the key, right? What a fabulous example and piece of advice. And I'm sure that other people listening to this might have their own version of the self-date. That's your version. But I think the key is taking the focus onto yourself and completely away from business thought.
Yeah. It's just a simple self-check-in, because like exactly what you said, we keep giving and giving when we're an entrepreneur, and we forget to give to ourselves, which is we started this because of something within ourselves. So when you forget that, then it's easy to get lost in the day-to-day and not see the light of the end of the tunnel.
Exactly. And we've got to continue the dream, right? Like you said, we came into this business for a reason. We saw something in it. Yeah, we need to keep that fire lit. And part of that is giving to ourselves, checking in with ourselves. Yeah, I love it. Final question for you, Leanne. What piece of advice or gold nugget would you like to leave our listeners with, of anything at all?
I guess it's something that I've kind of already said, is just trusting the process. Is that knowing that whatever you're going through, someone else already went through it. It doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. It doesn't mean that you get to skip because someone else already went through it. But knowing that other people have succeeded. Like a lot of the businesses, sadly, that don't make through the 5-year mark or the 10-year mark, it's mostly because they're like, oh, okay, this is not worth it anymore. I'm going to take a step back. Versus like if that was something that they pushed through. There is a process. There is different things that you go through. Overnight success in 5 years does happen. It is just a journey and a path, and it's knowing to trust the process, or also knowing that just to kind of listen to yourself when everything else is loud, everything louder than everything else. It's just having that time to yourself. Like, okay, is this the process that I even want to take still?
That's wonderful. What a great piece of advice. Yeah. Having perspective and trusting that process. You're right. There is no overnight success, and we've just got to, be patient and take the next step, have the self check-ins, and know that there is an easier way to get through. Yeah.
Yep.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your insights today, for sharing your story. It's been absolutely delightful. I've really enjoyed getting to know you and learning about you and what you've created and why you've created it. How can people get in contact with you? Obviously, we'll have your details in the show notes. Can they just reach out to the website?
The fastest way really is just through my LinkedIn, even though it's not really me who's looking at it, this is my assistant, but she checks it every single day. I'm on there almost every day as well. And other than that, I have a lot of resources. I have my YouTube channel. 2XU website itself is abound full of resources and things to check out. So those would be the two main things.
Beautiful. Well, go and check those out. I know I will. Thank you, Leanne. It's been a pleasure, and thank you.
Thank you so much. Been a pleasure to be here.